The Legal Cheat podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, home of the private equity trading contract. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Legal Cheat podcast. Today I'll be talking about one of the most daunting hurdles for aspiring solicitors, the SQE. Whether you're wondering what the exams are actually like, how to maximize your chance of success, or how to manage the stress and burnout that can come with preparing for them, we're taking a closer look at what it's really like to do the SQE and pass it. I'm Ryan, I'm a writer and researcher at Legal Cheat, and today I'm joined by my colleague Nadia, who has already passed both SQE1 and SQE2 and lived to tell the tale. As for me, this will be my last podcast episode because I'm going to begin my SQE prep course at the University of Law in a couple of months. So hopefully Nadia can help answer some of the questions I have about the SQE and assuage any fears or worries I do have. Hopefully they also apply to our listeners as well. So Nadia, let's start at the beginning. Before you started the SQE1, what were you most worried about? Did the reality match your expectations? Was there anything about the course that surprised you?
Honestly, I think my biggest worry was definitely the amount of content. Obviously, the course starts in September and then the exam is in January. So I kept thinking to myself, how am I supposed to learn all of this? And also, how am I supposed to remember everything as well? Learning in class is one thing, but then being able to recall it weeks later and under pressure as well, that was like a challenge that I was thinking about. I was also worried that I would spend months and months sort of like revising and practicing and then only to feel completely burnt out by the time the real assessment came. So that's something that was sort of playing on my mind before I started. In terms of expectations, I think the workload was as intense as I expected, to be honest. Everybody says that the SQE is this difficult exam. So I did go into it kind of knowing that it would be all this content and like as difficult as it sounds. But then I soon realized that you don't have to be fully prepared while you're still being taught new material. I guess what matters is that you're ready by the end. So that kind of like helped alleviate these like stresses that I sort of had. It's not like every single day I had to be up to scratch. It's more like when the time came, I had to be up to scratch. And so even if it felt like I was sort of behind, or I can't grasp new concepts because I'm still busy learning the old concepts, there is still time, when classes end to when the exam is to sort of like focus on revision, catch up, go back to earlier topics, and everything sort of comes together and everything is consolidated before the exam.
Yeah, it's
And then in
definitely
terms, oh, sorry,
sorry.
go on,
I
go
was
on.
going to say it's a bit of a change of pace from uni, I
Yeah,
imagine. It's
absolutely.
in a uni law degree, it's 3 years long of doing content, whereas
Yeah.
in, as you say, between September to January before you sit the exam for SQE1 is a very short time span.
Yeah, and actually on the back of what you just said about university, like that's kind of what surprised me about this course is that I'm obviously used to writing essays. I did a law degree, having time to develop an argument, shall we say. But then with the SQE, you're kind of working in a completely different way. You got to recall. It's almost like a memory game. It's kind of like a different side of your brain being used, is what I felt. I wasn't used to having to memorize and then like have to answer a question closed book in a while. It was a challenge for me as well because my last closed book in-person exam was my GCSEs. So my A levels was affected by COVID, and then during uni, most of our exams were online. So this was like the first time where I had to simply revise and memorize and practice. So that was quite an adjustment and I guess a surprise in that sense. Yeah.
And as you mentioned there's a lot of content to learn in that 4 months,
Mhm.
and it's a big worry for students. How did you approach such a large syllabus? I think it's 14 topics in
Yeah.
SQE1 without
Yeah.
becoming overwhelmed or kind of too stressed out about it? Or what study techniques were you using?
Um, to be honest, I feel like I didn't do anything particularly extraordinary. I kind of just, used my diary, kind of broke down the topics day by day and what I wanted to study, which obviously sounds like standard advice, but it is true. And also, it helped that where I did my SQE, the provider sort of broke down each module into weekly units. And so each week was a different unit within that module. And so you would just complete the corresponding underlying law and then the practical law reading, and then come to the workshop sort of ready to discuss or even like talk about what you didn't understand. And so every workshop had a theme. And so that also made it manageable. It wasn't like I'm staring at this massive chunk of content and not knowing where to start. It was broken down for us. And I just followed basically the schedule of what the provided basically. And then, yeah, following that structure just meant that I could keep up with the reading and make my notes. Whether I understood those notes was a different matter, but I kind of told myself like you just need to make these notes because when it's quiet time, you'll be glad that you've written the notes. I know
Mhm.
some people like they struggle to maybe move on to the next thing because they still haven't understood the first thing, but you will get left behind because every workshop is different. Every workshop covers a different area and they expect you to discuss that area. So it's quite hard to discuss the previous area because that's long gone. So I would probably recommend just reading the textbook as best as you can and making your notes. And then later on, you can try and come back and understand them. Because honestly, there's not that much time between the course ending and the exam starting. And if you're starting your notes afresh by that point, then yeah, it'll be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, for techniques, I guess, like I said, just using my diary, I guess, and kind of using the course's structure as it is. And like I mentioned, just making sure that you have your notes ready and written every week. So yeah, by the end, you're kind of all done. And then I know some of my friends, they use flashcards when it came closer to the exam. I'm not a flashcard person, so I didn't use flashcards, but I guess it helps with like there's a lot of rules or like dates or like small little things that you can put on a flashcard to sort of test yourself. So I know that's a common way of people like a common study technique. I mean, yeah.
And did you find that between balancing all of this, you still had time for yourself, your friends, like a social life outside of uni?
Yeah, of course. I mean, especially earlier on in the course, I feel like you're still recovering from holiday mode, you've come from summer vacation.
Yeah.
So as long as you're keeping up with the reading, like I said, you have time to do social things. I don't think there was any workshop that ended later than 5. So
Mm.
you do have time to do things in the evening. And also you don't have workshops every day. You might have them 3 days a week. You might even have them 2 days a week and just have like a full day of class, like times two. So there's definitely time to do things and on the weekend as well. I would say obviously during mock week, it might be a bit quiet because people are like studying for mocks. And so that's obviously understandable. And then obviously leading up to the exam, you don't hear a peep from anyone because everyone's like head down studying. And a lot of like me and my close friends, we all did the SQE at the same time. So when it was crunch time, like we didn't see each other at all. But I mean, it's sort of like temporary pain for like long term gain. You
Yeah.
don't see your friends for a while, but then you come out the other side and it's all good.
And speaking to a lot of people who have done the course, actually, they say it's very normal to feel behind or never feel properly ready for the exam. Like there was always something extra they could learn. There was too much content. Did you ever feel the same? Do you think it's normal to feel that way?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, like I think most people will feel behind at some stage. It might be in the very beginning, trying to really remember like your law degree content if you did it ages ago, or it even might be when it comes to mock period where you feel like because basically for context, mocks are done like while you are learning. Like you'll just randomly
Mm.
have a mock week in the middle, and so if you haven't like grasped the earlier content just yet, you'll struggle with mocks. So people feel behind in that sense. Um, and also, I think it is easy to compare yourself with others because obviously, I mean, this is a familiar environment for all those students being very competitive from school to university. And someone might be more vocal about understanding like a certain topic, but then you have to remember that they're not talking about what they don't understand. And that topic
Mm.
that they don't understand, you might understand it. So like you just hear what they do understand and what they do love and enjoy, and you feel like, oh, like I don't get this topic, but you never know what their weakness is. So it's normal to feel behind, but just remember everyone is probably behind. They're just not vocalizing it. Um, and yeah, honestly, the best thing you can do is just focus on yourself, focus on your own progress. Like I said before, you don't need to feel ahead throughout the course. It just matters at the end, like, are you ready? Are you ready to sit this exam? People work at their own pace. People understand at their own pace. So don't let that get to you. I know I felt behind at times. And like, yeah, I have obviously friends who did the course and maybe I felt like they were ahead. But, in the end, we all got there in the end and we all had successful results. So yeah, it will all work out basically.
And how did your routine change in like the weeks coming up to the exam? Or was there anything you did differently in terms of study wise, or what you was doing
Yeah,
with the content, how you was addressing it?
honestly, just this is gonna sound really bad, but just study. Like there
Mm.
is, it's this exam is intense, and I think like there is no like cheat code of like hoping a certain topic might not come up. because I'm pretty sure not every exam, but the assessment providers, they produce like variations. So you could be sat next to someone in the exam room and they'll have a totally different paper to you. You could have more of one topic and they could have less of the other. So you can't like, there's no cheat code of knowing what should you study, what shouldn't you study. So that means you just have to study everything. Closer to the time, I did have like a different sort of study timetable where the exams are broken down into FLK1 and FLK2, and they're both done like a week apart. So week one is FLK1, week two is FLK2. And so my study timetable, after teaching ended, I started with FLK2 and then did FLK1 because I wanted FLK1 to obviously be the most fresh in my brain since that was the first exam. And also, depending on when you choose your dates, you get a bit of time in between the two exams. So I remember my exam was on a Tuesday for FLK1, and then my FLK2 was the following Tuesday. So I had a week to then go back to FLK2 and relearn that stuff that I did initially. And then, yeah, I kind of just studied it how I was taught chronologically, and that makes the most sense because sometimes the units sort of like you can't understand unit 6 without learning unit 4 in a sense. So I just went chronologically. I did the underlying law chronologically, and then I did its matching, what is it called, practical law. And I think the key is, and I cannot stress enough, you have to do practice questions. Like you cannot rely on just simply studying and like knowing the law. And this is because like an exam will cover, sorry, no, a textbook will cover content in a lot of detail. But then when you actually get to the exam, you'll realize that, let's say, topic is presented as a short sentence or a short paragraph, and you have like 4 answer options, and it might not cover everything you've learned in that topic. And so you kind of need to be able to spot what the question is asking and then think back to the wider topic. And so you need to get used to seeing this topic presented in such a small, like brief way. And also just in general, practicing that format. Like I said before, in university, we're used to writing essays. This is such a different way of being assessed, at least to what I was used to. So practicing just answering those questions and spotting patterns and what they're trying to ask and key wording, yeah, is obviously helpful. So that's closer to the exam. I would say I did more practice questions. Every time I covered a unit and I did the underlying law and the practical law, I then did its corresponding MCQs, what they're called. And when I was done with a whole module, then I would do like a mock exam for that entire module, because then it would only pull out certain topics. And it's like, do you remember these certain topics when they're in a random order as well? And then rinse and repeat for every other module.
You made a really good point there about doing practice questions, because in my experience, I've been trying to retouch upon my underlying law modules, because I finished my undergraduate degree like 3 years ago now, and I'm starting the SQE next month. So
Yeah.
it's been a while since I've revisited a lot of these kind of topics. I've been looking through the constitutional law textbook for the SQE, and some of the topics in there are covered in like a lot of detail. And I wonder, how could this be possibly assessed in a practical kind of scenario question?
Absolutely.
Like, how can the parliamentary process or constitutional conventions, why there's so many pages on it in the book, but like I can only see it distilled into maybe like one line in a practice question, and you really won't understand what you need to learn until you have kind of done the corresponding MCQs with it. And I say that, and I haven't even started my course yet, so I'm still yet to learn a lot. But that's just one example I have seen. Yeah.
No. Yeah, I agree. And like practice questions as well. So with my provider, we were given a bank of practice questions, and every time we had a mock, that means they sort of generated new practice questions. So we had quite a lot of practice questions. But I think the biggest tip that I would give with practice questions is that if you can, of course, try and branch out and try different providers' practice questions. Like if you have a friend at a different place, or I think there are some free samples online, and I think the SRA also post their own practice questions. And this is because I got so used to using my own provider's practice questions, I kind of almost started to recognize the pattern and the wording that they would use. And without even finishing the question, I almost knew the answer. And that's no fault of the materials themselves. It's just because I studied them so much that I now know the answer. And so branching out is definitely helpful, because then that's also a true test of whether you know the content because you're able to answer a question even if it's worded in a different way. So closer to the time, that's when I did the branching out of trying to find free samples online or asking friends at different providers to kind of see what their questions look like. Because ultimately on the day, obviously your provider didn't write the exam. So I guess don't get too comfortable with your provider's style of asking questions. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point as well, because it's obviously not you or BPP or Barbary who writes the exam.
Yeah.
It's Kaplan or the SRA. I know
Yeah.
Kaplan. I mean, it's the SRA who writes it. I think. I think that's
Yeah.
how the relationship
I
works.
think so.
But they're all just trying to guess at what's going to be on the exam based on their experience
Hmm.
of having taught the SQE for the past couple of years. So getting a different perspective is definitely going to
Yes.
be very
Yes.
helpful. But yeah, what was the exam actually like? What was the actual exam experience like on exam day? How did you feel? Was you very nervy? How did you approach it?
So in terms of like my feelings, yeah, I was very nervous. I mean, I don't even think I slept the night before, to be honest. I was, yeah, I was very nervous. I was trying to tell myself like it's all right, like you know your stuff. But then it's weird because like then I felt like do I know myself? Like I kept questioning myself. I was getting in my head. I remember even waking up like earlier and trying to look over notes, but then I know some people say like that's not good because like giving yourself last minute information is never
Yeah.
going to stick. But yeah, I was nervous basically. And then the actual exam experience was a little bit confusing. I think registration was a little bit tedious. I think you have to bring two forms of ID. I can't remember or
Mm.
something like that. There are instructions though, and obviously. I would say like arrive earlier than the reporting time because you know how London can be with transport issues. Um, yeah, but on the day, I think even the depending on what test center you are, I was in a quite small one, so I think that's why maybe they're a bit slower. They just maybe weren't used to dealing with this massive group of students, so it kind of did take a while to finally get seated. And yeah, you have to check in, give them your ID, and then they give you, I think they give you a seat, or I can't remember if you choose a seat, something of the sorts. Um, and then you can also bring your study notes in on the exam day. But instead of bringing my laptop, which is just a bit of a hassle to have to open and things like that, what I did was I wrote down like key things on a piece of paper for each module for me to remember, like maybe dates, numbers, like small things or things that I knew that I wasn't that confident in, and I would just like write them down, like a cheat sheet, I suppose. Because you have a break between the two sessions. And in that session, you are allowed to access your notes. So this is something that's unique to SQE1, but SQE2, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in another podcast, you do have a break, but you're not allowed to access your notes. Whereas in SQE1, you are. So you should make use of that. Also bring a snack, bring some water because you're going to need it after the first 2 hours and a half, and then you still have 2 hours and a half left. It's a long day. You probably woke up very early. So that's kind of what the experience like. I remember the first exam FOK1, I didn't bring a snack because I thought like, oh, like realistically, this break is probably not long enough to eat, and also that will make me even more nervous. And I regretted it. So the next time I did bring a snack. So I would say bring a snack. Um, and then lastly, I guess, I mean, it's easier said than done, but don't worry and don't overthink it. Um, you know, and I think the biggest tip as well is don't let the first half of your exam like knock your confidence for the second half. They're both separate halves. Um, you can't go back and change your answers once you finish the first half. So as hard as it might be, if you did feel like maybe you didn't do as well, just try and ignore it and try and do better in the second half because you never know, like those extra points that you're winning in the second half could, will bring your score up. But if you're too focused on the first half, then you might jeopardize the second
Mm.
half and then maybe get a result that you don't want. I know that's easier said than done, but yeah.
And looking back, is there anything you'd do differently if you had to reset SQ? Well, you're not going to have to reset SQE1. You'll have to think about it again. But
Yeah.
with the knowledge you have now, is there anything you would
Yeah.
have done differently?
Honestly, this is hard, not because it was like a successful result, but because I just felt like, for me at least, I had almost given my all at the time. Like I was
Mm.
very tired. I had studied for a long time. So thinking like, what else could I have done? Even at the time when I was anxiously waiting for results, I couldn't think of what else I could have done because I felt like I exerted all my energy onto this exam. I think we sometimes we can sense if we're prepared for something. It's not necessarily being like overly confident, but like
Mm.
maybe you're just confident in yourself that you've done your best. So, um, like what would I have done differently? I'm like the type of person that like makes lists and plans like before something's even started. So I know some of my friends said maybe like starting practice questions earlier is probably like a good tip. Like I said, because you need to get used to the format, and especially if
Mm.
you're not used to it, then that can be tricky. And yeah, maybe trying to come up with like reasons why something might not come up or something might come up. Like just you gotta study everything. Like everything's gonna come. Like I remember I had like so much EU law, and that for me is a nightmare because why am I studying EU to be honest? I had so much EU law. And people were saying it won't come up because, like, it's not that relevant these days. And I had
Mm.
questions of EU law prior to Brexit. So even like ages ago, and I still got assessed on that. So, you never know.
Just cover everything in detail, make sure to
Yeah.
study everything. Yeah, it's not like uni. I remember at uni, people would like say to strategize and drop a load of topics because we'd have a paper of maybe 12 to 16 questions and you'd only have to pick four of them. So you are
Mm.
privileged in that if you really don't like a topic and come it's not going to be assessing kind of like a multi-topic question. Like if you're doing contracts, offer and acceptance could be kind of in all the questions you're going to get
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
all the
Exactly.
proper
Yeah.
questions. But if it's something like standalone, like maybe frustration, you can completely ignore that topic.
Yeah.
Whereas in the
Yeah.
SQE, it's completely different. You have to learn
Hmm.
everything. And also with I think one of the things I've heard from a lot of the webinars we've done is that the ethics and professional conducts question can like be interwoven into
Yes.
anything across the two
Yes.
papers. So you've got to kind of
Yeah,
remember all of that
actually.
as well.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point on that. Yeah. I think people tend to forget about ethics, and actually, that is probably something I would do differently is really, really revise that because I feel like I was one of those people. I remember when you get your results, you get a breakdown of each module as well. And
Mm.
like, I think ethics for a lot of people wasn't as high just because, like you said, it's sometimes hidden in another
Mm.
question. So you might think, oh, this is a criminal question, but it's actually an ethics question.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're very obviously ethics questions, but true, they are interwoven as well. Yeah, 100%. And then I think maybe, sorry, I was just going to say the
That's all right.
last maybe tip or something like that is don't disregard the underlying law. A lot of people think like, oh, the law degree, like it will come to me naturally. There are stuff that I didn't remember because there were like modules, for example, what is it? Like contract law. I did in my first year. That would have been 2021, and I sat the SQE in 2025. Like I had to go back and revise contract law as if I'd never seen it before, to be honest.
Mm.
So don't underestimate underlying law. And sometimes to answer the practical law, you need to know the underlying law, like it's linked. And sometimes you might even get just an underlying law question, no practical law at all. So then if you not revise the underlying law well, you won't be able to answer that question. Yeah.
It is shocking. I mean, I did constitutional law back in 2020 and I've just picked up a book to read it again now. And it's genuinely like it's the first time I've read it. I remember nothing. And I'm reading, I'm like, this is so fascinating. Like, I did do
Yeah.
this 6 years ago now, but I did not remember any of it at all. But did you have any other advice you'd want to proffer to anyone who's feeling anxious or is a bit worried to start?
Um, First, I think it's like, totally like valid. And, I'm not surprised that people would be anxious. Like it's a nerve-wracking exam and it's totally valid to be worried and to be in your thoughts. But I will say, like I said before, if you're just disciplined with studying, try to prioritize, especially closer to the time, social activities. And yeah, you kind of like keeping track of what you've studied or what you don't understand. Then hopefully some of those anxieties will lift. And yeah, like I said, the biggest piece of advice is please practice the MCQs. I think that's, like I said before, a lot of people maybe think, well, I just need to know all the content because when I see an MCQ, then I'll be able to answer it. But like we said before, sometimes the MCQ is worded so narrowly in comparison to what the topic actually covers, and then you're left a bit confused. Um, I guess my other piece of advice would be don't worry too much about a bad mock grade. Like I mentioned before, mocks happen like in between the course, and sometimes, you're learning every single day or every other day at least when you have a workshop. You're having to read all these different textbook chapters from these different modules. So it's quite hard to then go back and also revise for a mock. So it's no wonder that people might get bad grades because, well, you haven't had time yet to study because all you've been doing is learning. So yeah, I would say treat a mock as just a snapshot of where you are in the moment, and it won't reflect on what you're going to achieve at the end, like at all. So don't worry about that. And I know it's hard because I think, um, like I said, law students they tend to be quite like, they like to be straight A students and they're hard on
Mm.
themselves, but like, don't worry about it. Like, I don't think I know anyone who had a like difficult mock grade and then also struggled by the end. It's more like the end exam is difficult, don't get me wrong, but they understood that the bad mock grade was just in that moment. And when the time comes, you're raring to go. Um, and then maybe some on the day tips. I would say the SQE is not just a knowledge test, it's also an endurance test. You have to be sort of reading the question carefully and applying the law accurately and like your judgment for a very long period of time. It's 2.5 hours for the first half and then 2.5 hours for the second half. And it is very tiring. Honestly, by the second half, you're like, God, get me out of here. So when revising and when you're doing your practice questions, I would say try and mimic exam conditions, have no notes, nothing like that. And then even if it's just half of one session, so not the full 2 hours and a half, but just to get your brain and your body used to like having to read and stare at a screen and then move to the next and then move to the next is very helpful. And maybe lastly, don't focus on one singular question if it's difficult. The clock is ticking, and if you spend time on one difficult question, you may be missing out on 10 further questions that you could have answered very easily. And every question is worth the same mark. Everything is worth 1 mark. So the longer you spend on one question, the more you're missing out on 10, and you could have got 10 marks over that 1 mark that you're trying to figure out. So answer it the best you can and then maybe flag it and move on. And if you have time at the end, you can revisit it. But don't spend too much time on one question and let the clock tick. Because I think that's also what gets people is they want to answer everything correctly, and you're bound to make mistakes and answer things incorrectly. So if you can like accept that and try to find the best answer and move on, that'll probably do you better than focusing on one question.
Oh, I mean, you've offered some really fantastic advice. I think you've definitely you assuaged some of my fears. I am quite excited to start the SQE. I feel like it will be an interesting time, and I've heard from a lot of
Yeah,
people that the key is just to go in with a very positive mindset, which I think is difficult when there's a lot riding on the exams. But ultimately, that's
yes,
just kind of
absolutely.
the key to a lot of things in life. Just heading in there, believing in yourself, and then hopefully it's a
Yeah,
lot of work
I
out
think
fine.
Yeah, like you said, I think if you have confidence that you'll do okay, and like, you've got your classmates, your friends, you're all in the same
Mm.
boat. So it's not like one person has the upper leg. None of you have done it before, and
Yeah.
you're all going in together. It's almost like a little trauma bond support group. Um, but yeah, like you said, go in with an open mind, and it's I think like yeah, just accepting that it is difficult. Like it is a
Mm.
difficult exam, but I guess that's the point. Like we are going into a very maybe difficult profession. So
Yeah.
I think it should be difficult in a sense, and it should test us to the best of our abilities. And yeah, I think once you accept that, you can kind of like accept it for what it is and just try your best.
Exactly. And I think, well, that's all I've got to cover. Do you have anything else you want to add, Nadia?
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say we'll be back for another episode of the Legal Cheek podcast next week, but I won't be because this
I
is my very final
know.
week at Legal Cheek. But
So
it's been
sad.
lovely. It's been lovely being on the podcast and writing articles. Maybe you'll see me again for an interview or a podcast sometime. But
Would love
for
to.
now, I'm excited to start my SQE, and I'll also be relying on you, Nadia, for all your advice. Maybe on notes sometime in the future, but we'll see. But that's a goodbye from me. Bye, everybody. The Legal Cheat podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, home of the private equity trading contract.